we're spending a lot of time talking about creating agents this and how you describe agents that. But I tell the company every single day, value is not on creating agents, value is on using agents. So we need to make extremely easy for companies to go from zero to using.
Hi, welcome to AI Confidential, a show about AI and how to benefit from it responsibly. I'm Aaron Fulkerson, the CEO of Opaque.
And I'm Mark Hinkle, the founding publisher of the Artificially Intelligent Enterprise.
Today, we're sharing a conversation with João Moura, the founder and CEO of CrewAI. I am so excited for you guys to hear from Joe, he goes by also. The reason is CrewAI has really caught the agentic wave. The company is a year and a half old. It's been broadly adopted by enterprise, small, medium, and large. And it makes it much easier for you to get to value from agents to create automated workflows with its multi-agent platform. And he's just a great guy. Like, he was so fun to talk to, and he's got such a positive vibe.
Yeah. And just the tidbits, like they're not even 18-month-old startup. They're like 16 months. And he's talking to the Fortune 50 about their use cases, what they're trying to accomplish, sort of, just lessons learned. And everybody wants to do agents, but there's very few people that are doing it in production. And he's seeing tons and tons of them. They have 100,000 developers certified in CrewAI. I was shocked by that number.
Yeah. And great conversation, great insights, and just super dude.
I know you're having a little man crush with Joe.
He's just so positive,
He is positive.
He's really
like
positive.
Yeah. I think it's that he's like this Brazilian guy who's like come to Silicon Valley, and he's super optimistic and doing well. And I love to meet people like that.
Yeah, likewise. What's your AI in context, Mark?
So I think it's interesting. There was a TechCrunch article by Julie Bort about even A16Z VCs say no one knows what an AI agent is. And I mean, I think that's hyperbole, but I do think that we talk about all of these technologies, like as soon as they come out, we overestimate them in the beginning and underestimate them in the long term. And I think that's called Amara's law. But today, everybody's like, all these agents are going to take care of all this stuff. I'm worried about losing my job. And really, it's like I think it would be like if you were doing a project at a preschool. Like, you could tell each one of the kids to do one little thing well, but if you ask them to put together the collage, it would look like it was put together by a preschool. So, but you could say, hey, cut out, pictures of the animals, and then the teacher helps you put it together. I think that's where we're at. But when you listen to or watch some of these demos, you're like, oh my God, this, cursor just did 100,000 lines of code today. And I'm like, yeah, it probably did. And whether or not without some oversight, is it good or not? What do you think? Like, are you using agents? I know that some of your staff was using email agents.
So on this topic is like, I think the definition of agents might be a little murky, but when you think about like RESTful architectures and REST APIs and service-oriented architectures and et cetera, there was a pretty loose definition, but there was great ambiguity within it. I don't think that's unusual. And I think maybe the cynicism or skepticism that we're seeing is a signal, like you said, of this particular law, which is part of that hype cycle curve that you have seen Gartner make famous, where you have like the hype, the peak hype, and then it drops into the trough of disillusionment. And maybe we've gone just past peak hype and we're sliding down, which is an indication of the maturity of agents increasing. I noted Esteban Kolsky, who's now at Constellation Research. He is a professional cynic, and he was I saw a post this morning about, he's like, are we done with this whole agents thing? And I love Esteban. He's an old friend, but I just don't understand the cynicism, to be honest. The fact is, yes, the agents today that people are using, which are individual actions being tasked that require some discrete decision making, I guess that's what I would call an agent, are a bit confused in their execution. But we heard Joe talk about it, where he's got systems of agents monitoring systems of agents, coaching each other. And I just, this isn't going away. Like, anybody who thinks this is going away or this is like some kind of fad are the same people who think the internet was a fad. And by the way, I'm not saying Esteban thinks that, but this isn't going away. And oh, by the way, the funny thing that you said about a coworker who was using agents was, I had an executive assistant who was using a particular email application, not shortwave, I love shortwave, to automate responses to emails. And I don't know if this would be automation with language models or agents. I'm not sure, but it was complete nonsense. So for like a month and a half, people who know me were getting just complete nonsense emails from my EA.
Including me. I thought
like it made no sense whatsoever. I mean, I applaud her enthusiasm for AI, but her execution was abysmal.
Yeah. I was getting ready to stage an intervention. I thought you were losing it, but I think that agents are getting there. If I've played around with an AI backed sales development rep, and
how was that? Did it work?
It wasn't bad. I think that it's like anything else, though. If you have an employee, you've got to train them up. And these agents, if they just go off of, come from the model directly, so they're accessing OpenAI's models or Claude's models, they lack a little bit of context. So, but if you put in the time with them, I think that they could really, really,
Does anybody want to talk to them, though? Like, I've gotten calls from agent SDR bots, and I try to prompt inject them and get information about the company. It hasn't worked, but I have not been very determined. Like, I was on a jog recently, and I got a call from one of these AI SDRs, and I don't even know what the company was, but I was expecting a call from this same area, so I was like, oh, I think it's so and so. Anyway, my prompt injection attack did not work. But does anybody listen to him or talk to him?
So I was just listening to Matt Wolf, who's like the #1 AI YouTuber, and he has a show, Next Wave, on the HubSpot network. And they were talking about AI avatars, and that's what caught my attention, because I am going to be using them for some training, and so I've been testing them, and they're surprisingly good. And this guy is the #1 YouTuber, and he's like, well, I feel like if I start doing that, people will call me lazy. But then they had all these examples of other folks that are in the industry that have, the one guy was building a digital twin for his Instagram channel, and it's growing like crazy. And when I listen to this, I would rather listen to my avatar that doesn't say and when I'm tired. That's like my biggest thing is I'm glad we're recording in the morning, because by the end of the day, I'm like, hey dude, what are you doing? And in the morning you're crisp. So I think I would rather just have a good experience, as long as they're a good experience. And they're not like Max Headroomy, for those of you that grew up in the MTV generation.
Going back to agentic or agent, which I think, at least that's what I interpret agents as, is what previously might have been a function or a workflow that has a language model with some autonomy to make decision. We have this customer, Bloom Filter. They're a really interesting company. They do process mining for software development lifecycle. So they're ingesting data from Jira and GitHub. And their customers are large enterprises. The particular use case for them with agents is what previously might have been, I don't know, modules of their application are actually agentic workflows. So there's a agentic workflow for doing analysis of risk associated with a particular epic or story. And then there's another module for analyzing software development, performance metrics, etc. So each one of these are discrete agentic workflows because it's easier for you to architect the application and maintain it that way and then add additional features. But the point I'm making here is everything in technology is something old moved up stack. That's been my observation since I began my career. I started at Microsoft doing research in distributed systems, and there were things that I thought were new and interesting. And then people I worked with were like, oh, we did this 20 years ago. We just gave it a new name and it's easier to use. So it's just something old moved up stack. And that's my opinion on agents.
Yeah, I actually like so there's this idea, they're called agents because they have agency, but I think of them as a workflow where it can accomplish a goal, not just give you a response. So if I say, take this spreadsheet and convert it into SQL tables, I can do something like that. But as soon as you try and like layer on too many steps, it gets confused. So when I build teams of agents for help with creating a newsletter is a good example. So everybody gets a newsletter, and so each agent I prompt with all the information I want to say, like I want to talk about, say I want to write a newsletter about agents, and I bring up all the things we just said and the points and my point of view. And then I have a researcher that goes out and looks for all the research. I have one that creates the original copy for the articles. I have a copy editor that actually goes through and applies my style. And then I have an editor, because each one's sort of a special skill, and then you train it with the knowledge. I just feel like if you try and create the Uber agent, what we really envision is going to like ChatGPT and saying, write my TPS report for the week, and it'll go scan all my email, scan my Google Drive, do all that stuff and pop it out. And we're not there. But, if you start breaking down the steps, we're like 80% as long as you still want to manage your agentic interactions.
I think we're going to be 3 years from now looking back on conversations like this, and it's going to be exactly like observing people talking about there's this new World Wide Web thing, and what are the web pages, and do you have a web page?
I 100% remember those days in the 90s where people would be like at the end of a Ford commercial, it's like, get on the information superhighway.
www.
Ford.com.
My wife has a flower truck that she pops up selling flowers throughout San Diego, and it's absolutely adorable. Junie the flower truck. And she said to somebody, oh yeah, I'm on Instagram at Junie the flower. I was like www, but she was like giving the at symbol. It was so cute. Yes, it's clear to me anyway that agents aren't going away. It may change in what we call them. Like we don't say www anymore when we're talking about websites, but these are here to stay.
So that sounds like a good segue into this week's conversation, where we have João from CrewAI. He's the founder and CEO, and they are one of the, if not the most popular open source AI agents. So let's get into the conversation.
I'm going to try to say your name the proper way, even though I know you go by Joe. It's João?
João.
João. Okay. That's right. João. Okay, great. Well, I know you go by Joe. You're the founder and CEO of CrewAI. For listeners who may not be familiar with CrewAI, probably because they've been living under a rock, tell us about CrewAI.
Yeah, sure. So CrewAI is a company that has three products. One is a framework. It's an open source framework that basically helps engineers and non-technical people to build agents. And then two enterprise offerings, what we call CrewAI Enterprise and CrewAI Factory, where we sell mostly for bigger Fortune 500 and Global 2000 kind of companies. That's it. So we were like on the cutting edge of a brand new industry and kind of like learning along the way and how we go. Wide experience.
So I guess the product that I must be somewhat familiar with is the you said that there's the framework, there's the enterprise, and there's the factory. So it's probably was the first product the framework?
Yeah. So the framework's how it started. It's funny because I have kind of like a history or a track record of kind of like doing work on open source. I always just loved open source because you get to work with like amazing people. So I was building agents back in late 2023, and it was very different than what it is today. And there was nothing around, and I managed to put something together that I felt was super special. Like it worked like a charm. But I want a way to replicate that for mini agents. So after not finding anything that I did get online, then I basically put together my own framework, and that's how CrewAI, the framework, started. And that led into the company later, but we can cover that.
Well, you guys have been on a tear in terms of popularity. You guys, I think I heard about Crew AI. I don't know. It was probably only like 6 or 7 months ago, and now I see and hear you guys everywhere.
Yeah, I gotta say it's fun. I think like out of like everything that happened, there was a few things that I didn't expect to happen. Like they're a little insane. I'm like I'm keeping a track record of like the insane things that happen. For example, us having our logo in a billboard in Times Square. That for me was like, whoa, I never foresee this coming. Or even like next week, I'm flying to meet Satya. I'm like, what like relative new universe I'm living on. I dig this one. It has been like a lot of popularity, and but with that come a lot of scrutiny as well. But I won't complain. It's what I signed up for, and if anything, it has been very interesting.
So when did you officially start Crew AI as a company then after you were playing with the framework?
Yeah, so the framework, I remember that it was late October because I was building the framework on my anniversary. My wife was not happy about it, but I took my computer with me for the trip, and I remember that I would wake up early and do it in the mornings, in the afternoons, and sometimes late at night. And then I actually created the company in January. So you fast track a few months, like 3 months or so. What triggered the company was I was actually on a meetup here in San Francisco in Shack 15. And someone came to me and said, like, hey, we're actually using CrewAI in production and we could use some help. I was like, wow, that's amazing. Like, what company you are at? And like, oh, I'm with Oracle. And I was like, wait, what? Yeah, we're
Wait, this
with
was just
Oracle.
this January you started the company?
Not this January, January 24th. So a little
24.
bit
Okay,
ago.
that
Yeah.
makes more sense because I
Okay.
thought I heard about you in like October, November of last year. So I was like, wait,
Yeah.
did I? Okay, that makes more
No,
sense.
no, no. That was it.
Yeah.
And then that was it. Like I think like this guy from Oracle like asking me about like production use cases made me think like, well, maybe there should be a company. And that's how the whole thing started.
That is such an awesome open source story.
Yeah, I gotta say, yeah, I think you're right. Open source stories is the way that I would put it. I never thought about when I started with the open source, like the people that I would meet and the experiences that I would have. It's very rewarding in so many ways. And at the end of the day, honestly, we really care about the open source. I think like a lot of companies that are built on open source, they can look at open source and see like as a distribution channel, right? A way to get leads and all that. And those are true. It is. But I challenge the company as a whole to think about open source as a community. And the reason why I like to think about that way is because if it's a community, then there's different ways that you can serve that community, right? So, for example, oh, you can create a jobs board like what we did. You have like jobs that CrewAI.com now that filters all the jobs from all the companies out there that mention CrewAI, so that if you know CrewAI and you want to apply for that, if you're part of this community, you can actually apply to this job. So I think like thinking about this as a community and people that are tagging along the journey is more interesting to me than just thinking like this is a distribution channel or whatever.
Yeah, I love that. When I did my first startup, MindTouch, it was, I mean, we started by forking MediaWiki because it was the most popular open source wiki on the planet at the time. And then we did a whole bunch that made it quite different. But that was the most exciting part, was seeing all of the interesting use cases that people would come to you with and cool stories. Like it still powers 1 billion visitors a month on the world's largest open textbook service, LibreText. So it's out of UC Davis. It does 1 billion visitors a month on the software that started off as an open source project. But it was just the passion that people would bring to the project from their own use cases. Like, who would have thought somebody, I mean, that's crazy. Within like 8 months, you had somebody at Oracle, like putting it into production.
Yeah, no, I mean, the Oracle guy was like 3 months. I built it in October. By like December, this guy reached out to me and I was like, all right, well, if this guy is doing this, then I incorporated the company as a C Corp in January. And then things started. And then from there, we end up getting the VC route. And it has been kind of like a up and to the right since then. But yeah, I mean, open source has this power, right? And I look back, people sometimes ask me like, hey, why do you think you got that adoption? Why do you think the framework got famous and people really like it? And I think at the end of the day is there's a few things. Technically, I think we end up going with a very developer-centric approach. I mean, I come back from the Rails community, the Ruby on Rails community, and Ruby on Rails that has like some of these guidances of like convention over configuration, optimizing for developer experience. And I think a lot of that highly influences the way that I build CrewAI, where I almost want it to be borderline magical. Like people see it works and like they wonder how this works behind the scenes. And it's all about these conventions. As long as you follow them, things work. Now, yeah, sometimes people need to be able to open up the hood and kind of like just mess around with everything. So we end up adding a lot of more like support to complexity in that way down the road. And that has been work wonders for us.
The fact you came from the Rails community makes total sense in how you've approached CrewAI.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for sure.
that makes a ton of sense. I did not know that.
Yeah, now you know it tracks. And I think honestly, Rails is like, I think there's two sides of the same coin, right? If you make things like borderline magical, what you get is super fast to get to value, right? And this is where Rails, in my opinion, up to this day, is still undisputed the fastest ways to spin a new app, even faster than anything else that I know. Especially if it's only like a simple crude app, you just want to control things. Now, the downside is one, you got to stick with the convention. So you got to have an opinionated view about how things should be viewed. And you can, if and customizing it becomes a little more challenging, right? So a lot of the work that we do now is how we make customizing less challenging. So people are super easy for people to customize it. And that's where we launched CrewAI Flows, for example, and a few other features that people in the community will love. And the other thing that I would say is yeah, I think in general is just having like that mentality of like this is our opinion on how you should building those. What I think end up working in our favor for this market, because honestly the market is kind of like they're trying to people don't know what to do or how to do it, so they want someone to tell them like, hey, this is where you go, this is what works, this is what we're seeing out there on thousands of people, on hundreds of customers and everything. So I think that also works in our favor.
You just said open source and the code and everything. My question is, are you using Agentic AI to help write the CrewAI code? Is it like self-designing yet?
You bet. So what happens today is, and this is super funny, right? So if you open up an issue on GitHub, like you have an issue and you open it up, what happens is that automatically triggers an agent. That agent goes and tries to fix the issue and open a PR. Now that PR triggers another crew this time, and the crew will basically review that code and then left a comment. And then the initial agent pick up on that comment and re-implements all the changes. And we're finding that that can take care of like 70% of all the issues that get open. So it's insane. The bottleneck now is actually like the final review and merger. So it's less about the issues, about merging now. That's kind of like becomes like the bottleneck there. So we haven't automated that piece yet.
That's amazing.
What models do you use for that?
I think we're using Sonnet 3, Cloud Sonnet 3.7 for all the review and all that. Yeah, and there's like some deving also going on in the mix that has been very exciting to use.
Well, from Opaque standpoint, we're super passionate about data privacy. Particularly with AI, it's difficult to know, well, how do we have guarantees around the data privacy so you can retain the sovereignty of your own data? And the sovereignty piece is what we are really passionate about because it's easier than ever for your data to be weaponized against you if you leak it because of AI, right? You could have somebody who can disrupt your business model because they're able, maybe they're like a distribution partner or a supply chain partner, and somewhere along this chain of agents that we're going to see proliferate where they're interoperating with one another, some of your intellectual property gets leaked. And historically, that probably wouldn't have been a big deal, but with AI, it's actually a really big deal. So tell us a little bit about how you approach data sovereignty when building Crew and how you encourage that as part of the framework.
I mean, we have seen like quite a few extremes, especially on the open source. Those things don't bubble up as often, but on the enterprise for sure, especially kind of like on kind of like the enterprise and highly regulated area, right? So there's a few things. For example, our best-selling product is actually CrewAI Factory that we haven't announced it formally yet, but it is our best-selling product because it runs completely self-hosted or even on-prem. So that means that like you can literally run this inside your infrastructure and VPC and architecture, so there's no data going out. So that is a big thing already on itself. Then the other thing is there are certain countries where PII and personal information cannot leave their borders, right? So we had to implement a feature called privacy sanitization, where automatically replaces information about a person and abstracts it away. So instead of saying like, hey, this is Joe living in the peninsula in California, I would say a male person in California, in the US, right? So it's abstract all the information away before the request goes out into like other pieces of the word and then injects them back as this information gets back in the customer. So we saw some of that as well. And it's funny because we have some deals on the federal government and we had to have like some of our code validated by FedRAMP High organizations. So even though we are not like FedRAMP High, we work through partners that are, but because our software being deployed in that environment, the software needs to get validated to some extent, right? So that has been an interesting thing. Gladly we're able to be validated, like zero vulnerabilities, but that was not how it started. I can tell you that. But those are some of the pieces that we're seeing. I think there's concerns about data leaking into internally, people that should not have access to data, and data leaking externally as well. On top of everything that I said, and we can double click there.
Our turnkey partners that will accelerate your FedRAMP High certification, and then they host you in their environment. You probably already know about them, but there are several of those that are out there. Have you looked at any of the confidential AI capabilities? You know, obviously that's what Opaque does, but Meta just released an interesting paper or documentation on their WhatsApp private processing, where they're using confidential computing to run encrypted data with their models and have verifiable evidence that the messages from the end users, while being used in those models, they cannot see, nobody else can see. I don't know if you've gotten any of that. I mean, you've been on a rocket, so I don't know if it's even a demand yet.
No, I don't. There's no demand yet clearly for that, but I have seen some papers around it. This idea of like encrypting the messages and being able to verify that the message was not altered in any way, right, along the process. I think that's a big thing. What we're seeing more of concerns is honestly right now the market's a little earlier. It really more like, hey, if this agent has access to a certain tool, like say like an agent has access to an HR tool, can someone in the company use that to kind of like extract information from the HR
Yeah.
data? And that is a huge concern for these companies. So that is something that we have been seeing in there. But this idea of encrypted messages, I think the market's gonna like pick up on that pretty fast because I think prompt injection, especially on front facing, kind of like on front facing use cases that are like kind of users interacting with this, I think there's going to be more of a concern in there. And now with like the whole protocols in like tools, external tools calling and all that, I think it's another layer, right? Another vector of attack for these companies that they also will require some sort of encryption as well.
Yeah. So the factory product, is that the partnership you did with HP Enterprise? Is that the deployed on their hardware sovereign? Is that what that is?
That's part of it, yeah. So we deploy it on, we can deploy on any cloud, honestly. In the end of the day, it's using Kubernetes behind the scenes. So as long as it supports Kubernetes, you should be good to go. But with HPE, it's our factory product in a box. So it comes with a few things pre-installed. It's a partnership with HPE and NVIDIA because it comes with NVIDIA NIMs pre-installed, and then CrewAI Enterprise Factory pre-installed as well. Now, if you want to have names in there, you can remove, you can have something else, depends on up to you. But it's kind of like just everything nicely packed in a box. So it's basically you're buying an agent in a box. You can think about it that way. It's funny because we're seeing like, it's almost fun because you see the marketing are scrolling back from the cloud a little bit. I'm not saying that everyone is going kind of like running their own data centers and everything is going to be on premise or anything like that. But it's almost funny. I was having dinner with someone that works on a huge bank just last Friday, and they were talking to me how frustrated they are because after like a decade, they're finally finishing up moving everything to the cloud. And now people are like, no, we want to run these models locally, or we want to do this. And like, oh man, I just finished this work. So it has been fun to watch some of the market movements with that.
Yeah,
Maybe
that's a
you can
pervasive
do
trend.
maybe you should do an appliance like in Silicon Valley. Like you can put a cool logo on it and people can like ship them in FedEx and put them
You're
in their
literally
racks.
describing the HPE product, dude. It
really
is an
am.
appliance. It is an appliance.
Oh, yeah, I'm
it's an AI appliance. Yeah.
I mean, the cool thing that what HP is doing that I think no one else is doing at, and the strategic bet they're taking, I think like it's a bet.
Mhm.
If it's going to fly or not, I think they're going to depend a lot of like how the market's going to respond, but I think has all the right things into it. And that is that usually they sell huge servers, right? They're known to serve those kind of like big customers, but now they basically t-shirt size that and they have like extra small sizes. So you can literally buy a server that you would run in your house, like nothing huge. And the idea here is creating kind of like a prototyping environment for engineers that it can be turnkey into production pretty easily. So yeah, they have some very like small machines now that you can actually buy, and it's a pretty interesting take and approach to this.
I don't mean to take it back to Mind Touch because it was 2 lifetimes ago, but we had a hardware appliance and we sold it to small businesses and we sold dozens of them. But it was only dozens.
I hear you.
And then we switched to everything was a VM. Like the hardware was so freaking hard. It was so hard. But yeah, we did that for a year and we're like, okay, this is just way too hard. Okay, going back to your HR use case. What mechanisms exist in CrewAI to enforce granular access controls? Like perfect use case right there. We have this same use case at ServiceNow and a bunch of other companies where obviously we're a confidential wrapper for agentic frameworks. So potentially CrewAI would run an opaque, but we provide guarantees around those policies that are tamper-proof and provable. What are you guys doing on the granular access side? Use that HR as an example.
Yeah, I think honestly, and I'm going to take just one step back here. It's funny because what you're seeing is there's this entire new stack that is forming, right? And people are looking at this stack, and it goes all the way back into like the data management level when you have like a Databricks, Snowflake, BigQuery, and all that at the basis. And then you have a bunch of layers on top, including the LLMs, the orchestration, the memory, the authorization, authentication, all the granularity that you're talking about. And then I want to think that the outmost layer is kind of like agentic apps, where basically you have all this kind of like the UIs that you can wrap around kind of like these agents and what that would look like. Now, the one thing that I'm realizing throughout this all conversation the last month is the one thing that this companies care the most, interoperability across the entire stack. You want to be able to flip things out and flip things in like pretty quickly. So what we're trying to do is There's a few places in that stack that are non-negotiable for us. Like we want to own that no matter what. And then there are places that we need to have an offering, so it doesn't become a blocker on closing deals, but not necessarily like could be an entire company. And authentication, authorization, and scoping is one of those, right? We have kind of like the bare bones that allows you to get by, but I mean there are companies that will live and breathe and just do this to a degree of excellence that it won't be able to, right? And I think that's where kind of like you guys fit in as well. So right now on the CrewAI, what we do is one, we come with an array of connectors pre-built for you. So let's say they want to integrate with SAP for HANA or ServiceNow or Salesforce or everything together. We have all those integrations built out for you. And then what we do is we are very granular on the account that you connect with is going to give you access only the permissions that account has. But then when you run your agents, you can say, I'm running this from what user. So each user has their own like a key that they can use. And that basically means that when the same agent runs, it's going to have access to a broader or a narrower scope given that user connection to that external platform. Now, that takes care of most of the use cases, but in the end of the day, like the more advanced these customers get and more the market expands, a few extra challenges pop up. Like, what if I want to dynamically change that? And that might work for applications that you will off into, but what about the data management? Like, if that is touching my data bricks. So I think there's a lot of nuances in there that the market is still figuring it out, but we are scoping on these OAuth applications, doing like fingerprinting, scoping, and all that in there.
That makes sense. You talked about interoperability. MCP, Mark, I know this is something that you and I have talked about. I know you had a question about that.
Yeah, I mean, everybody's calling it the USB-C of AI, and I am too because it's easy. But do you think it's really going to be a standard that everyone adopts?
I don't know if it's a hot take, but here's my take. Definitely everyone would benefit from a standard, right? People do want to have standards. Everyone would benefit from that. Now, is that going to be MCP? Is that going to be A2A? Like what that's going to be? I'm not sure. I think like standards that comes top down from like Anthropic, Google, Microsoft, I think it's harder to catch because they usually come very coupled with their services and offerings, right? There's like a strong like incentive for that. And I think like standards that comes bottom up usually tend to kind of like get more easily adopted because they're more abstract. Now, what stances we take? Honestly, we are sitting on all this table. So we're talking with Cisco on agency. We're talking with Anthropic and AWS on MCP. We're talking with Azure and Google on A2A. But right now, my position is we're going to adopt whatever wins. I'm a simple kind of guy. Honestly, if we could all do HTTP and we just agree on kind of like a format, I would much rather do that. But yeah, I think new protocols, at the end of the day, the community is king. If they adopt something else, we're going to support that. We support MCP today and are going to probably start working on support for A2A as well.
And one of the reasons why I think people are interested in that is just interoperability of all sorts of AI systems. But when we think just about agents, do you think that we'll all have teams of agents that will interact the same way that people interact and will just trade information and tasks? Or is that here today? Is that coming? What's the future look like in your mind?
That's a good one. I think honestly, right now, when I think about the way that AI agent systems, right, broadly, I'm talking about agent systems, are manifesting themselves in the world, basically three forms, in my opinion. One is what you're calling is synthetics, right? Is like agents that are taking the shape of like roles and people, and you hire them and they're going to do this one job and all that. There's also kind of like the app building approach that agents are adding a lot of value and manifesting is like this is a true category, right? Where like agents are going to build apps, build pieces, and that is kind of like where you're seeing things like Windsurf, Cursor, and a few others and all that. So it's less about synthetics, about this building process. And the third one that I think like we are seeing, we have been seeing more, and we are now seeing like from more perspective, we're not doing synthetics just yet. But we are doing app building, and we're doing this last one that is more of like traditional RPA, We're like, hey, what about these automations and these processes? Like, if you boil down the agents to like, I don't care about the agents themselves, I care about the processes that they're automating. And are these processes more effective? Are these processes better? Are they saving me money? Are they moving faster? Right. So I think those are the three ways that kind of like AI agent systems are manifesting themselves right now out in the wild in a way that is actually there's monetary value. It's becoming a real industry in there. Now, I think synthetics are going to play a role in that for sure, and I think it's going to be a big one. And I think sometimes this three verticals, if you call it that way, will converge. And what that will look like, I think, is a little bit too soon yet for us to know. But I definitely see that in Crew AI, you can have agents talking to each other and sharing information. You can see them delegating work to each other, what I always found super funny. So they can say, like, hey, you did it wrong, do it again or do it better. And I was like, damn, this is so weird. This model is delegating work to each other. And the cool thing is you can bring agents from other frameworks into Crew. A lot of people don't know that. So you can bring a LangGraph agent, an OpenAI agent, and a CrewAI agent, and you can wrap all them into a Crew. And they are now going to be talking to each other and delegating work to each other. So it's always interesting to see kind of like other possibilities there.
Yeah, I've seen that before. I mean, I think the B folks who are now part of the Linux Foundation are talking about almost being the, orchestrator of agents. And I think Aaron's example, we were talking about HR, is then do we need HR for agents? That's the thing that I don't know what Workday for agents looks like, but if I did, I would be building that right now.
I gotta say, funny that you said this. I had a Fortune 50 company asking me exactly that question, not even 2 hours ago. And I was talking with one of their C-level executives, and they're like, how you're thinking about this. And I literally used the Workday example. I was like, hey, are you thinking about like Workday for agents? Like, yeah, exactly. What is your stance on that? So it's very real. Like so far, I think there's a few, it's more progressive companies that are thinking that way. But I had a company that reached out to me that happens to be a customer already, actually. And they reached out to me and they're like, it was funny because it was almost like is a meeting that almost sounded like we're doing something wrong, like we're back in an alley or something. And he was like, hey, let me ask you one thing. If I give you a job description, can you turn that into an agent? And I was like, I mean, I can definitely see a way. Let me get back to you on that. But yeah, there are some companies that are definitely going there. I think the big picture economically, I think it's going to work out, and I have a few strong beliefs about that. But definitely, there's some executives out there that they're looking at this and they're just like, all right, like what this means for headcount, and that's the way that they're thinking about success.
Yeah, I think that's wrong. I think it's like, it's a consideration, but they're only looking at half the equation. If you want to be a successful company, you can reduce your expenses with the existing revenue, or you can make more revenue with the existing expenses and your margins go up. So either way works. I feel like people are missing that second upside and they're just looking at the efficiency.
The people who think that this is about headcount think that it's a zero-sum game. It's not a zero-sum game. It's an infinite game. So that's the thing that just jumps out at me. By the way, going back to traditional RPA, those are the really interesting use cases, in my opinion, because it makes it so. I'm making the statement because I want you to challenge this idea. Building a really complicated workflow using a series of agents, which I've done and I've watched some customers do, like intimately watch them, just seems so much easier,
Yes.
right? It's like so much easier to create this abstraction where you have a series of very small tasks that are being strung together as part of a composite.
Yeah, I know, I agree. I think honestly, if you look back, and I mean, this is not a dig on RPA. I think RPA is such an amazing industry. If anything, they created this industry, right? They got like companies to really start thinking about automation and processes in a way that companies just didn't really think about before. But I think like there's a few things in there that now like they're completely challenged. And that is this idea of like, hey, I need to build this automation, and now I need the specific engineers to build those automations. And I'm gonna go out there and I'm gonna hire this huge SI that's gonna cost me so much money to build all this. Now, I think SIs play a role in AI agents for sure. I mean, we're partnered with many of them, but you can see that is a way more strategic and thinking in the process, not only about implementing, it's more about like, hey, how now that we have all these automations that were not possible before, how we rethink these processes from the ground up. And that's kind of like the role that they're playing, that I think is a way more interesting role and probably worth more of their money than like, hey, a gun for hire to implement RPA. And the thing is, it's funny because some of these customers sometimes they have huge IPA installations, and they some of them want to extend that, some of them want to replace that, some of them want to do different things with from that. But it's there's almost like this thing of like, let's not touch it. Like it's like, don't touch it. It's working. It's just don't look too much at it, because if you look too much, it might break or something.
It's like Perl script or something, right? It's like such a tangled mess.
Damn,
Um,
you put that
You
in such a
just
nice
dated
way.
yourself like
well, I mean, it's fitting. You know, you used to like go read through somebody's like Perl script. You're just like, oh my god, like I can't make sense of this, right? And I know it's not that bad, but comparatively speaking, when instead you can look at like discrete tasks being decomposed that you can just inspect each one of the agents and then string these together. The thing that I find really exciting, where a lot of my conversations are these days, is how do we know that this agent is our agent? How do we know that this agentic system is our agent? And how do we know that we can share data with it? So all of the conversations that we have are around creating zero trust systems that you can create using hardware attestation with explicit rules against each resource. So a resource could be a communication channel, a data source, a Kubernetes node, an agent. And all of these get chained together as zero trust resources that data is being processed while encrypted. And then you can do an inspection beforehand where you're like, is this the attestation that I expect it to be? Okay, it's my agent, it's Sonnet 3.7, it has specific security parameters that I expect. I will send data to it. And then each chain of that agentic system gets chained together with attestation and zero trust. And what a lot of my conversations are about now is, okay, now let's put an MCP endpoint on that, or an A2A endpoint. And let's make that confidential as part of the chain so that you can send encrypted data to it while holding the encryption key and know that everything's being processed end to end. Any data I send into that agentic system, nobody can see, not the hyperscalers, not the person who's running that agentic system, because it's part of a confidential system. And the data, I don't know how well you know this space, Joe, but there's a concept of trusted execution environment where there's an encrypted cache inside the CPU or GPU where your key gets transmitted where nobody can see it. It gets decrypted during process time where no one can see it in that encrypted environment. So to me, that's the other beautiful thing is as you start to create composites of these agentic systems, it's easier for you to create that zero trust chain all the way down to the hardware in a way that would be probably impossible to do if it was like monolithic code.
Yeah. No, 1,000%. And it's funny that you mentioned that, because I was on GTC. They had like an underground hackathon happening that was pretty good, and I was invited to judge it. And I was in there, and one of the demos was exactly what you described. It's like, how do we encrypt this all the way to the GPU level, so that like no one knows what's going up, all the way to the message coming back? And I thought that was so cool to watch. I mean, honestly, I think there's no way around it, right? Because it's such a early days in the industry. I think we haven't seen the potential vectors of attack just yet, and there is a strong pull from customers like want to get into production faster and kind of like get value from these things. But the thing is, like, if you don't watch your kind of like your security layer, if you don't watch your privacy layer, if you don't have tools in your stack to help you with that, then honestly, you're flying blind to some extent, and this could turn out into a huge nightmare. So, yeah, it's definitely a concern, and I think customers that are moving faster. Customers not as much, but like users that are moving faster, they should be thinking about, all right, like how do I actually gear this up?
Yeah, the thing that I always bring up is like, do you guys remember being at OSCON or Linux, what at LinuxCon or what Scale, and we'd be on the Wi-Fi networks with no encryption. It was just straight HTTP, no HTTPS. That was crazy. And then like people would come up to your booth, to the people working in your booth, and be like, "Dude, your password and login is this." I'm like, "How'd you know that?" I'm like, "Seriously, you were logging in on this open Wi-Fi network at an open source conference, you fool."
Come
The
on.
same thing was going to happen, right? In compute with where we're going is particularly with agents where it's like, wow, these agents are operating autonomously, reasoning, making decisions, passing around data. It's totally probabilistic. There is a less than zero or more than 0%, maybe less than 1% chance that an agent could inadvertently share the incorrect data with somebody. Just using combinatorial math on that, at 100 agents interoperating, you're at like 60% probability. At 1,000, you're at 99.96% probability that one of them is going to inadvertently share some information. That doesn't even take into account malicious intent.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think like it's interesting because a lot of my conversations with customers nowadays, I mean, there's a bunch of customers that are highly educated, but what we see is many customers they come in and they're like, they're asking all these interesting questions, right? About memory and graphs versus events and all this. That I find that sometimes they're stuck in discovery mode. And what I tell them is like, hey, all these questions that you're doing these educational and discovery questions, and they're very relevant and they're interesting. But let me tell you one thing: all this is becoming commodity very fast. All this is table stakes. Yes, you're gonna need memory. There's many ways that you can do memories. Now, the questions that you really should be thinking about is if you are gonna be an AI agent native company, and my definition here is like I'm gonna have hundreds or maybe thousands of agents running in my organization in X years from now. Now, no framework will save you, right? So you think about having 1,000 agents, even like using CrewAI, that honestly, at least like I would say is the easiest way for it to build agents out there. Like 1,000 becomes unmanageable. So it's very clear that people need again a kind of like a suite, like an enterprise suite for all their agentic resources, right? So, and agentic resources here mean like all the things that we have been talking about is the agents, but it's also their tools, is also the authentication, is also the authorization, is the scope and everything that is happening in between. So I find that, yeah, companies, they're like moving from the discovery mode to kind of like, hey, I realize this thing is happening to my company and it's going to happen if that's where I want to go. Then the conversations got way more interesting and real because now it's less about like the memory and using a graph versus using something. It's about, all right, like what are the real challenges of deploying this on kind of like a really massive environment.
That brings me to something I think about a lot. I've built tons and tons of agents, and the design point is for me is just make that task super simple with plenty of good prompting of like many shot prompts to give it guidance. But I see the idea of agentic memory popping up, and that sort of goes hand in hand with the amount of training you have to put in to an agent. It's just not like you type a prompt that says, please answer all my email and my voice and make make them be polite. I mean, it's like training people almost. I mean, you're breaking down into simpler tasks, but if you wanted to replace a role with a bunch of task-based agents, it's a lot from my experience, at least.
Because you have to like convince them and nudge them and remind them. It's true. It really is.
We have to do a 30, 60, 90 day, performance review. We have to have them write their self-evaluation. No, I mean, but seriously, I mean, you can get it to do some pretty 80% cool stuff by just putting in simple prompts. But if you really wanted to have, good results, so I write newsletters, and so I have like 20 agents that go through each task in the newsletter, and I'm constantly tuning them and constantly turning them off and turning them back on, and replacing them. Is what do you see from your clients? Like, how much time do they put in or into this, and how do they keep their sort of memory, the agentic memory, up to date?
Yeah, no, I think you bring a great point. And I used to say this a few months ago, and I should go back at saying because it's so true. The people that build the best agents are managers. And I kid you not. Because honestly, in the end of the day, when you're writing these prompts, there's two things that you're trying to do that managers are hardwired to do. And that is one, a very clear definition of what success looks like, right? And then two, a set of instructions of kind of like what to do. So it's kind of like, hey, this is what I want you to do, and you're very clear. So if you think about like you hire a new person, that's a big part of being a manager. Like, hey, let me tell you what success looks like for this role, what I expect you to do. This is what success looks like. Now let me tell you what are the steps that I want you to take. I want you to take this, and this step. So in the end of the day, managers are just hardwired to think that way. And I have found that out in the wild, they're the ones that create the best agents with CrewAI because they're just thinking about that. Now, what people really want is like they want to be able to flip a switch and have like those agents do their thing. So that means that these agents need to be preloaded with kind of like that information so they can infer what a success looks like in some ways, and they can infer what steps to take in some ways. So you make that easier and easier. Now, what we have seen on what works is one, there's a lot of prompt iteration, right? You try different prompts up to the gate that got something that works. And then we built a new feature that has been quite successful. It's called CrewAI Train. So on CrewAI, and this go back so all the way to how we started, where we got a very opinionated way on how you create these agents. And we got a lot of kind of like pain from engineers early on because of this decision alone. And the decision was when you create a task for an agent in Crew, it's mandatory for you to give it two things. One, a description of what is the task, and two, what is the expected outcome. And you can see here that again, we're framing back to like what you need to do and what success looks like. But people like basically would ask us like, well, why do I need to say the expected outcome? I'm already writing the description. I don't want to say what the expected outcome is. What they don't realize is that now we can do features like CrewAI Train, where basically it's not a fine-tuned model, but it fine-tunes your prompt automatically with feedback from the AI itself. So the AI can run, get the final result, compare with the expected output description that you gave it, and if it finds lacking, then it changes the prompt and do it again. And you can do this many times over until the point that you're starting getting diminishing returns. And you're like, all right, now the output very strongly matches what was the kind of like the actual output from the agent. So that is one way that we found out to shortcut. So now people don't need to do like many iterations. They can use CrewAI Train and the prompt get automatically updated for them up to the point that it gets pretty good.
Yeah, I find that when I've helped people get started with agents, I just say, listen, we're going to write good prompts and we're going to use the model that your agent is, which is usually one of the OpenAI models. And I think that's the right thing. At the point of diminishing returns, when you're like, yeah, this is pretty good, then you put it into the agent and they're running those iterations. I think we'll get better at providing natural language direction, but we'll never get better at having it predict outcomes, because only you are going to know what the right outcome is. It might predict the outcomes, but you're still going to have a manager in the loop to give you that agent employee evaluation, I suppose.
I love the idea that managers are really good at it. That's it makes sense. It's interesting. As you think about the agentic space, which is the hottest space in software right now, you're going to see it become increasingly crowded, right? All the RPA vendors are going to be agent vendors. All the workflow vendors are going to become agent vendors. What are the main business differentiators you want to emphasize? Where do you think for CrewAI, it's like, hey, we're going to differentiate on these things. We know that's where it matters.
Yeah, I think you have a good point. I mean, honestly, the market's so big. Again, I think we're talking about this early on. It's interesting that you can tell how big it is because all these big companies, right? They usually have like CEOs that have been honestly like coasting along for some time. Like if you're winning, you're like, all right, like I'm winning. That's okay. That's nice. But now you can see that a lot of these big companies actually getting down the dirt to like, no, 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 we need to get this going. This is real, right? I can tell you one example. Like when you launch a new product, what is your main source of visitors to your website? It's Google. And I can tell you right now, trending up at number 14 is ChatGPT for CrewAI. That means that there's like, on top of all the sources, like all the cross blogs, links, ChatGPT has been trending up and now it sits on 14 from like people going to our website because ChatGPT told them so. So like honestly, I'm not
I
sure
have not
like
looked at this on ours, but that's pretty shocking that it's 14th and it's
yeah.
gaining on Google so quickly. That's amazing.
So honestly, if you like think about that for all the industries, it's coming for everyone. So like everyone's kind of like they need to figure out a play in while trying to erase their way. There's lapping agentic on anything. Like this is the name, agentic whatever, right? And it's funny because companies are picking up on this, right? I mean, I had one of the biggest analyst companies out there, right? You have Forrester, you have Gartner, all these companies. They're calling this agent washing. Like people calling things agentic just for the sake of agentic, and honestly, like makes a disservice for the industry in general because like now CIOs, CTOs just have more noise that they need to parse through to understand like what is truly agentic. I think in the end of the day, the main reason why people are choosing to use CrewAI open source and CrewAI enterprise is because we focus on value. It's a speed to value, right? We're spending a lot of time talking about creating agents this and how you describe agents that, but I tell the company every single day, value is not on creating agents, value is on using agents. So we need to make extremely easy for companies to go from zero to using, not from zero to building, not from zero to planning, not from zero to secure. They need to be zero to using. So I think at the end of the day, that really resonates. And that, of course, when you materialize that in our roadmap, there's going to be specific features that kind of like translate to that. But I think that's kind of like the first principle that are really guiding these companies is like when I use CrewAI, I build fast, I ship fast, I get everything that I need ready to go, and at least enables me to get like that competitive edge. I think that's the main thing where like we're really differentiating ourselves. On top of the fact that interoperability is a big thing for us, right? So again, as I said, you can bring different agents and frameworks together. You can host this anywhere. You can use any LLM. You can do on our cloud, on your cloud, on prem. So it's this idea of it fits what is right for you.
So for developers and companies just starting with agents, what advice would you give them to help them get to value, like you said, and avoid the common pitfalls? Or any way you want to cut that? It's like, well, here's the common pitfalls to avoid, or hey, here's a couple of things that are just fastest time to using, right? Fastest time to value.
Yeah, I want to say technically we can go very deep, but I want to take one step back. If you're
The
not,
audience can be pretty technical, Joe. Like, yeah, I mean,
no, I
I
mean
don't
we
know if
can
you've seen
get,
it gets pretty. Maybe start high and then go low because
yeah, yeah, yeah.
these tend to get pretty nerdy.
I want to get technical, but I want to say the problem is a lot of the problem is it sometimes start way earlier. Like honestly, it's lack of planning. The company didn't spend time planning about like these are the use cases, this is what success looks like, this is what we're going for. And because they don't have that, they don't have a way to measure it, and they can have a way to measure it, they can scale it, and right that becomes a set of problems that even if you have everything technically bottom up, like pretty tightly and nicely together.
You know, it's so funny because it's like exactly how you'd program an agent that you said, which is to have a very clear definition of success.
There you go.
I haven't worked in that many big companies. I've worked in a big company. And yeah, it's like you don't even have a definition for success. Like start from there. And then you said the second thing was what is the very clear definition of success and very clear instructions.
Yeah, I think honestly, like it's funny because we had some customers where like we had all those amazing meetings. We are talking about these use cases. People are super excited. Then we go talk with like the executive, right? Like it's a C level in that company. It's a huge company, over 100,000 employees, and you get to the executive, and the executive care about none of the use cases. He wants completely different ones. And then you start to realize that what they're optimizing for are different things. Your champion is kind of optimizing for his word and maybe actual ROI, while the executive is actually optimizing for something he can explain for all the other executives. So like he still care for the biggest ROI, but it's the Venn diagram of the biggest ROI with things that any other executive can understand. They don't need to be that technical. Now, technically, once that you get past that, you know your use case, you know what a success looks like, you're building. Now, I would say probably use CrewAI is the easiest one out there. I want to say that you want to go that route. The other thing is you do want to track whatever success looks like. So for us, we have some crews and flows where we literally write tests, and these tests are measuring quality of the output. So use LM as a judge. It's something that you can build yourself. We also is on our enterprise product if you want to get that. And you can also use on the open source. There's a minimum version of it where you can use CrewAI test, and you basically evaluate your agents and what score they get by using LLM as a judge, what kind of hallucination they might be having using LLM as a judge. So you want to make sure that you're tracking that. So not only on the prompt level, you're seeing the prompts going in and out, what is very boilerplate nowadays, but also on a few layers above that, on the agentic level, you want to see like, is the agent doing what's supposed to? Is it using the reference material? Is it creating new kind of like fake data that's not supposed to be there? And are the responses any good? So I think like a lot of people skip like having like this testing set in things that they can measure over time as well. So those would be some of the technical things that I would point out.
You're coming to our conference in San Francisco. You're one of the speakers. Thanks so much for joining us there. You're in great company. You've got the CTO for Microsoft Azure. You've got the chief security officer for NVIDIA and a bunch of other folks. So if you guys want to hear more from Joe, come to the Confidential Computing Summit in San Francisco, June 16th through the 18th. Mark will be there too.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love that. I'm excited. I know it's happening. I don't know exactly the date, but I'm going to be there, and that's going to be super cool. Honestly, I love conferences nowadays. It's good to be back. Like it's good to see people face to face again.
It's like the old open source days, you know?
Right?
Right? You'd go to the
Exactly.
conferences, you'd like hack together something, you'd catch up with people that you know online, and it was, yeah.
I started a conference. We did it in March, and it was by far the best thing I did in my career. Aaron was there. My friends were there. The people in the community. We're called All Things OpenAI. We have to change that.
It's just All Things AI, right?
It's all things AI now.
It's All Things AI. Yeah.
But it was cool because everybody is really excited about learning about AI. Agents was hot. We did a half-day training on agents. And it's as exciting as 1999 all over again.
It's even more exciting, I think. I think it's more exciting.
It is
than
more
99.
exciting for sure. But thanks for coming, Joe. We appreciate having you.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming, Joe.
Thank you for having me. This was pretty good. And thank you everyone out there. If you're going to the conference, I'd love to meet you in there. I'm going to make sure to bring some swag so I can give it away if you're a CrewAI fan. But very excited. I had a lot of fun, folks. Thank you so much, Aaron and Mark. I really appreciate you having me.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. All our pleasure. Thanks, Joe.
Pleasure. So it was interesting to hear how many of the use cases that they had around just how agents authenticate and talk. What's the document? What's the AI passport that we're going to give our agents so that they can cross borders and interact? I know that you were really keen on understanding privacy and security there and had some good questions, Aaron. What was your thoughts on all that?
I think that's an exciting space to talk about, and it's a longer conversation. The reality is that we talked about this with Joe a bit, which is the way to do this is, and it's already Meta, Apple, Microsoft, Google. They're doing this already in production. But the way to do this is to create a zero trust chain for these resources, from the infrastructure, the data source, the communication channel, and of course the agent, that's verifiable through hardware attestation. And like Joe said, once you get to 1,000 agents, it's completely unmanageable. Once you get to 100 agents, it's completely unmanageable. Or I guess crews, as CrewAI would call it, because each crew is a multi-agent crew. It's completely unmanageable. So you have to like bake in privacy into the very fabric of the agentic system. That's the only way to do it. The thing that he said that really stood out that I loved was he was talking about how the wonderful insight was that managers are really good at making agents because they start from what does success look like? And I mean, isn't that life? Isn't that like everything? Everything's like, know what your expected goal is. What does success look like? And then you'll work backward from that. But have in mind what success looks like.
I think the prompt you start with is, what would you say you do here?
That was another cool one about the discussion around having an HR, which you brought up, having HR for agents. Like, what does it mean? Like, do you have to have an HR function for agent? And the answer is yeah.
Yeah, you really do. I mean, I struggle with this because I use CrewAI. I use another agent framework called
you
Cascade.
should have said that to him. He would have loved to have heard it.
I'm going to tell him that in person when I see him at the Confidential Computing Summit, man. But no, like the crew sort of framework seems to be the most mature and enterprisey, and it's somewhat easy to use, but it's not even a function of any of these frameworks. Is once you create all these agents, you almost have to have like for me, I have files of the AI instructions and what knowledge I gave them, because if I don't have that checklist, it's sort of like just taking a new employee in the first day and putting them in front of their email and say, go to it. I'm not doing tasks that aren't qualitative. For me, I'm using it to help edit my newsletters or improve my training or critique it. And the one thing that agents will never have or will be hard to impart on them is taste. So knowing what is good content, knowing what is a success, unless you have really binary levels of success for these agents, they can go off the rails, sometimes in a good way. Like sometimes it's written stuff that I said, give me a little Hunter S. Thompson, and it made my rating a little bit more, colorful. But, sometimes I've done it and it made it nonsense and sounded like I was taking, weed gummies. Maybe it was
Hunter S. Thompson after like a 5-day binge.
Yeah, exactly. Fear and Loathing in North Carolina with Mark Hinkle. Yes.
All right. If you want to learn more about how to use AI responsibly, check out our website at opaque.co. If you like the podcast, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And sincerely, please leave us a review. Good, bad, otherwise. We really want to hear from you, and we'd love to get your feedback. This episode of AI Confidential was produced by Wolverton Media Solutions, Places Media, Kodiak's Media, the AEI.net, and Opaque. Tune in to Opaque, the leading confidential AI platform. I'm Aaron Fulkerson.
And I'm Mark Hinkle. We'll see you next time. And keep in touch by subscribing to my newsletters at theaie.net. Why are there parrots all over your neighborhood?
I've heard different stories. I believe the true story is parrots escaped from San Diego Zoo and have bred all over downtown San Diego. We have a flock of probably 100 and 200 in our neighborhood. And I also have dinging and buzzing in my computer, but I gotta go pee. I'll be right back.
All right. Thanks for sharing that. That should be Aaron's outro. I gotta pee, and we just show him leaving at the end.